How's your hammer, everybody? I'm PTDevil, and welcome to another episode of The Deck Doctors. In this series, we'll be looking at some of the most unplayable archetypes in the whole game, figuring out why they're so bad, and designing some new support to help make them playable. The process we'll be using is examining what it is they do, diagnosing what their problems are, and prescribing a treatment for them to be less awful. With all that said, let's get to the video. If you've been with this channel for the long run, you may remember seeing my sister SkylerLightingStrike in a few of my earlier videos. She's not much for competitive play and she refuses to acknowledge MR3, let alone 4, or even whatever the hell the next one's gonna be. However, there is one archetype in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Of which she is particularly fond, and that is the Kuriboh archetype. I can see why they appeal to her, as the combination of cute visuals and their ability to tilt the opponent into abseiling out the nearest window is genuinely fun to use. However, partially since they were never designed to be one in the first place, Kuribohs as an archetype are severely lacking in both power and general consistency. Put simply, they don't have any way of doing anything consequential, especially since what plays they can make are heavily hampered by MR4. In retrospect, maybe that's why she hates it so much. Anyway, in honor of Christmas, I'm going to do my level best to improve these fluff balls and make them into an actual deck. We start off the review by looking at the puffball that started it all, Kuriboh. Like most of its brothers, it's a level 1 with 300 attack and 200 defense, this one being a Dark Fiend, and it has the following effect. During your opponent's turn at damage calculation, you can discard this card, you take no battle damage from that battle. This is a quick effect. Thank you, TCG, for clearing that up. I was wondering how a non-quick effect works only on the opponent's turn, but Daly-ho, I'm glad you were able to clear that up for everyone. Jokes aside, for the time of this card's release, this was actually pretty damn good. I never did get why in the anime everyone was always saying how useless Kuriboh was as a monster, even though for the time it had one of the best monster effects in the game, mostly by virtue of them barely being a thing by then. Of course, it was rarely used in the anime for its effect and was basically a tiny meat shield, so that may have been a factor. Still, even for years after its release, Kuriboh still saw play as one of the best hand traps in the game. However, the heavy hand of power creep eventually caught up to this poor furball, since blocking battle damage once by discarding a very specific card was not anywhere near as viable as it once was. And with far better hand traps in the game, any chance of this card making a renaissance in this game has been dashed along with all of its hopes and dreams. Sorry, buddy. If you're building a pure Kuriboh deck, you may still want to run a copy or two due to a number of support cards that interact directly with it, but outside of a dedicated build, I wouldn't bother. It's a similar situation with its GX counterpart, Winged Kuriboh. It's a light fairy this time, and its effect is the following. If this card on the field is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, for the rest of this turn, you take no battle damage. Well, thank God it looks cute, because otherwise I can't think of a real reason why you'd want to run this. It's somehow simultaneously better and worse than the original. Better because it can stop a whole turn of battle damage as opposed to just a single battle's worth, but worse in that it specifically needs to be destroyed. And in case you've missed it, that's not something you can reliably count on these days. To add injury to insult, you take full damage from any battles involving this card, so if your opponent has any kind of piercing damage, you're basically giving them a free direct attack with this. Again, though, there's a lot of support for this card in particular, so you're going to want to run one or two of these for what it is as opposed to what it does. One such support card involves an upgraded version of this card, Winged Kuriboh level 10. Like the name suggests, it's a level 10 light fairy with the following effect. Cannot be normal summoned or set. Must be special summoned with transcendent wings and cannot be special summoned by other ways. During your opponent's battle phase, you can tribute this face-up card, destroy all attack position monsters your opponent controls, and inflict damage to your opponent equal to the combined original attack of those destroyed monsters. Transcendent Wings is a quick play spell card that lets you send one Winged Kuriboh you control and 2 cards from your hand to the graveyard. Special summon one Winged Kuriboh level 10 from your hand or deck. Honestly, I'm not sure why these two exist other than the fact that they were used in one episode of GX and presumably never again in real life. Why this is a quick play is beyond me as well, since there's almost no benefit to summoning this on your turn. You could make the argument for a rank 10 engine, but the amount of minus it puts you into, as well as needing 2 very specific cards, eliminates any inherent usefulness in it. As for using it the way it was intended, again, you need to have 2 very specific cards on your field, and to have them both survive to your opponent's battle phase, and have 2 cards in your hand to discard for this card's effect. To be fair, if you do manage to pull it off, it's more than likely game over, but by that point your opponent is probably sitting on a negate or 2, so the odds of that happening are slim to none. If you're that desperate for field clearing and burn damage on the opponent's turn, you'd be better off just running Blazing Mirror Force instead. Things finally start to get interesting with the much more impressive Winged Kuriboh level 9. Again, as you would expect, it's a level 9 light fairy with variable attack and defense stats and the following effect. During either player's turn as Chain Link 3 or higher, you can special summon this card from your hand. Spell cards that have been activated are banished instead of being sent to the graveyard. The attack and defense of this card are each equal to the number of spell cards in your opponent's graveyard times 500. You can only control 1 face-up Winged Kuriboh level 9. Well, it counters Sky Striker, so that automatically makes it the best card in the archetype. Jokes aside, this is really good. Not only does it make for a free body on your opponent's turn, it also serves as a dimensional fissure for spell cards on legs to prevent your opponent from setting up their graveyard with their spells. Though that doesn't really matter for much outside of the aforementioned Sky Striker matchup, but baby steps. That being said, getting a free body with the potential for disruption on the opponent's turn is really handy to have, as evidenced by everyone and their mother running 2 copies of Thanos Dragon. There's also no restrictions on summoning this other than not being able to control more than 1, so you're free to special summon it by other ways, or even normal summon it if you feel like being that guy. Anyway, run 2 or 3 of these. Moving on to the 5Ds era, we only have 1 monster to talk about this time, Jung Kuriboh. If you're wondering about a much more prominent Kuriboh from this era, don't worry, we'll be coming back for it later. Anyway, this is an Earth Machine with the following effect. During either player's turn, when your opponent activates a card or effect that would inflict damage to you, you can send this card from your hand or field to the graveyard, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy that card. Well, it counters Trick Stars? That's something, I guess? But aside from that, it's only really helpful for being an extra Kuriboh name, as it's not something that can reliably be used with any sort of consistency. It's also an Earth attribute, so Chaos builds are gonna have a harder time with this. If you plan on main decking this, I wouldn't run any more than 1. Moving on to the Zexal era, we have just 1 more to talk about here as well, Rainbow Kuriboh. Again, see the previous entry as to the others. Also, why the fuck did they make it a 5th? It's a light fiend with 100 attack and defense, and you can only use each effect of Rainbow Kuriboh once per turn. When an opponent's monster declares an attack, you can target that attacking monster, equip this card from your hand to that monster. It cannot attack. And when an opponent's monster declares a direct attack while this card is in your graveyard, you can special summon this card but banish it when it leaves the field. This is probably the best Kuriboh when it comes to actually doing Kuriboh things. Case in point, it wasn't actually that long ago that this card was seeing competitive play. Being able to completely stop a monster from attacking permanently is pretty good, but with targeting immunity being so common, it isn't quite as reliable as it once was. It can also block an opponent's direct attack once after it's been sent to the graveyard, meaning it can get some additional utility beyond the first use. In a Kuriboh deck, you can never have too many Rainbow Kuribohs. Now moving on to Arc 5, we actually have quite a bit to talk about here. The first ones in this lineup are Relink Kuriboh and Sphere Kuriboh. Why I'm showing them as a duo will become apparent later. They're both Dark Fiends, Relink Kuriboh obviously being a reference to Relinquished, and Sphere Kuriboh being based on the Winged Dragon of Ra's Sphere mode. Relink Kuriboh says if this card is tributed, draw 1 card. If your monster would be destroyed by battle, you can banish this card from your graveyard instead. Sphere Kuriboh says when an opponent's monster declares an attack, you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard, change the attacking monster to defense position. When you ritual summon a monster, you can banish this card from your graveyard as one of the monsters required for the ritual summon. The reason I bring these two up together is because I'm about 90% sure that they mix these two up in the production line. Sphere Kuriboh seems more like Relinquish support than Relink Kuriboh, and vice versa regarding the God cards. As for which one is better, I would say Sphere Kuriboh takes it by a country mile. Relink Kuriboh is very situational in its draw effect due to needing setup in order to pull it off, and battle protection isn't as helpful as it once was. Sphere, on the other hand, is able to do what the original Kuriboh was meant to do, but better, barring Link monsters being a thing, and even offers a bit of recursion for ritual players. In fact, it's so good that Sphere Kuriboh is basically the quintessential card to run in Duel Links no matter what deck you play. Make sure to play 3 spheres and run Relink Kuriboh by preference. Next up we have the Dark Side of Dimensions version, Clear Kuriboh. It's a light fairy with the following effect. During either player's turn, when your opponent activates a monster effect that would inflict damage, you can discard this card, negate the activation. When an opponent's monster declares a direct attack, you can banish this card from your graveyard, draw 1 card. If it is a monster, you can special summon it, then change the attack target to it. You can only use this effect of Clear Kuriboh once per turn. This has to be by far the Kuriboh with the greatest disparity between the hand trap and graveyard effects. The hand trap effect is just a worse version of Junk Kuribohs, which is already one of the worst Kuribohs in the archetype, since it only negates monster burn effects and doesn't destroy the card while it's at it. The graveyard effect, on the other hand, is arguably one of the better ones in the archetype. At worst, you'll be able to block an opponent's direct attack, and at best, you'll be able to counterattack and put yourself ahead of the game. This puts the card in a tough spot since you'll want to run it for its graveyard effect, but since the most reliable way to get it in there is literally limited, you'll need to make extra effort into setting it up. Because of this, I wouldn't run any more than 2. The next card is Kuriboh, proving that Konami's pun game is still alive and kicking after 17 years. It's a light fiend with the following effect. At the end of the battle phase, you can discard this card, then target 1 monster in your graveyard that was destroyed by battle and sent there this turn, special summon it. When an opponent's monster declares an attack, you can banish this card from your graveyard, then target any number of Kuriboh monsters in your graveyard, special summon them. Aside from being one of only 2 cards that solidify Kuribohs as an archetype, this one is also pretty decent overall. The hand effect is a bit slow, considering it only works at the end of the battle phase, but it's still serviceable enough to come in handy once in a while. But the graveyard effect is perhaps the closest thing that Kuribohs have to an actual win condition of their own. Being able to summon up to 5 monsters off of 1 card is insanely good, and the amount of plays it can make for you is absolutely ridiculous. Whether it's Dystopia the Despondent, number 54 Lionheart, or even the Crime and Punishment duo, though that one is going to be a bit harder nowadays. It only triggers on the opponent's attack, which means you're more than likely going to be working with only 4 monsters max unless you add further setup. That is still the only Prozac you're going to get while playing this deck, so you may as well treat yourself to 3 of these. The last monster in this group is Performapal Kuriboh. I know it's technically a Vrain's card and I should be reviewing it as such, but let's not kid ourselves here, it's a friggin' Performapal. It was used by Yuya in the Arc 5 manga, so it's still an Arc 5 card. Anyway, it's a Dark Fiend with the following effect. When an opponent's monster declares a direct attack, you can special summon this card from your hand, and if you do, change the attack target to this card and proceed to do damage calculation. If you would take battle damage from that battle, you gain that much life points instead. I mean, it's not the worst one in the lot, but it's far from being the best as well. Blocking an opponent's direct attack and healing yourself by what you would have taken is a nice way to save yourself from an OTK. I just wish it did literally anything else on top of that. It's essentially just a slightly better version of the original Kuriboh, but since that one's already been power crept out of existence, even an improved version of the same thing isn't going to see any play. That being said, in a Kuriboh deck, it helps out just about as much as any of them, so feel free to run 1 or 2. Finally, moving on to the Vrain's Bruncheon proper, we have just 2 more to talk about here, starting with one you should all be familiar with by this point, Link Kuriboh. At the risk of elaborating on what you should already know, this is a Link 1 Dark Cyburst with a downward facing arrow. It requires a level 1 monster as material and has the following effect. When an opponent's monster declares an attack, you can tribute this card, change that opponent's monster's attack to 0 until the end of this turn. If this card is in your graveyard, quick effect, you can tribute one level 1 monster, special summon this card. You can only use this effect of Link Kuriboh once per turn. This has to be one of the best Link monsters in the game, mainly for what it is as opposed to what it does. Most of the good Link monsters will specifically exclude using tokens as material to prevent them from being cheesed out too easily, but since most tokens are level 1 already, you can just summon this card and then link it away to be able to make bigger plays much easier. Furthermore, it can also pull this trick off twice by removing another token to revive itself to be used for further plays. On top of that, if you take the self-revival into consideration, the Kuriboh effect is also very handy for dropping an attacking monster's attack to 0, though it does cause a replay since it tributes itself to do it, so it's not like you're going to be turning the tides with this effect. Still though, you can't do without at least one of these, and in a dedicated Kuriboh build, you may even want 2 or 3 of them. The last monster in this bunch is Kuriboh. I feel like if someone were to show Konami of America this card back in the early 2000s, they would have collectively shit their pants. It's a Dark Fiend with the following effect. When an opponent's monster declares an attack, you can discard this card, then target one monster in either graveyard except this card, special summon it to your field, but send it to the graveyard during the end phase. If this card is destroyed by battle or card effect and sent to the graveyard, you can add one Monster Reborn from your deck or graveyard to your hand during the end phase of this turn. You can only use each effect of Kuriboh once per turn. A quick effect Monster Reborn on legs that also searches out Monster Reborn itself when it's destroyed. I'm pretty sure that should speak for itself. While that is undoubtedly good, it's not going to break the meta anytime soon unless you're looking for very niche situations where this would trigger a whole chain of events that could turn the duel around in your favor. Something that neither this card nor Kuribohs in general are really capable of on their own. Nevertheless, this is still a fantastic card and you shouldn't run any less than 3 of these. Now before we move on to the spells, I just want to take a moment to go over the cards that were so close to being a part of this archetype, but a design cock-up in the production department left them excluded from all future support for whatever reason. Kuriboh, a cute continuation of the theme of the series that has since become entirely useless outside of gimmicky nurse burn decks. Kuriboh, a decent Link/Xyz spam engine that requires just a tiny amount of setup and is still pretty good in Xyz heavy decks. Kuriboh, a confused little guy whose heart was in the right place but seemed to either be under the assumption that you're losing spectacularly or have missed the point of avoiding damage completely. Kuribandit, a half-assed attempt at adapting a gimmicky anime card that was way too slow to matter then, let alone when it actually came out. Linguriboh, a thinly veiled Adignister support card that does very little to help said deck. Donuriboh Adignister, a much less veiled Adignister support card that does even less to help said deck. And Wretched Ghost of the Attic, a shitty normal monster recolor even by the standards of OCG Volume 3. Now that that's out of the way, let's move on to the spell support, starting with Sabatil, the Philosopher's Stone. I'm starting here because it's literally the only normal spell in the lot, since they're all quick play cards otherwise. If you have a winged Kuriboh monster in your graveyard, pay half your life points, add one Polymerization spell card or Fusion spell card from your deck to your hand, except Diffusion Wave Motion, thank you TCG. If this card is in your graveyard, you can banish 3 copies of Sabatil the Philosopher's Stone from your graveyard, then target one monster on the field. It gains attack equal to the attack of the monster on the field with the highest attack, your choice of tide, until the end of this turn. Oh hey look, I found the Seal of Orichalcos' long-lost brother. Seriously, how did such a broken card from the anime turn out to be so freaking useless? Even taking in the fact that it can search out Super Poly, the setup needed to pull it off and the heavy cost required to use it is way too much to even consider using it. On top of that, Kuribohs themselves have no fusion monsters of their own, so their usefulness to this card is limited exclusively to Super Poly targets. The only deck that I can think of that would actually use this card are Diamond Dude decks that are capable of bypassing both the activation requirements and the life point costs, and would benefit from being able to search out fusion spells beyond just Super Poly. But aside from that one gimmick, I definitely wouldn't bother with this one. Moving on to the quick play, since, as I said before, that's all that's left, we start off with the Flute of Summoning Kuriboh. Add one Kuriboh or one winged Kuriboh from your deck to your hand, or special summon one Kuriboh or one winged Kuriboh from your deck. Aside from working on two of the worst Kuribohs in the archetype, this is pretty good. I can't see why you would want to add a winged Kuriboh to your hand. I can barely see why you'd want to add original Kuriboh to your hand these days. But since there are still a couple more support cards that work directly with these two, getting an easy way to access them without using up the normal summon is really helpful. Plus, it's MR4, and getting free bodies on board will always be good. Run 3 of these. The next card in this lineup is Multiply. Tribute one face-up Kuriboh, special summon as many Kuriboh tokens, level 1 Dark Fiends with 300 attack and 200 defense, as possible in defense position. These tokens cannot be tributed for a tribute summon. As opposed to it being an infinite meat shield generator in the game, this one just flooded your field with tokens that couldn't be used for much of anything. However, this is one of the very few cards in this archetype that actually got better over time, since flooding your field with free tokens has since become the staple first turn play for any self-respecting link spam deck. And since this one has the possibility to net you up to 5, it's more than capable of pulling its weight. Opening this card alongside Flute basically nets you a ton of free advantage, and combining it with Link Kuriboh allows you to benefit from said advantage as much as humanly possible. Make sure to run 3 copies of these as well. However, what you probably won't be using those tokens for is with the next spell, Detonate. Destroy as many Kuriboh and Kuriboh tokens you control as possible. Then destroy cards your opponent controls up to the number of Kuriboh and Kuriboh tokens destroyed by this effect. I do like how it doesn't target, but other than that, it's not really worth the effort. At best, it's a -1 in card advantage, and you're getting rid of a lot of potential materials you could have used to make more plays that would have been better in the long run than popping a couple cards here and there. Plus, if your opponent has enough shit to blow up with this effect, they probably have a negate or 2 under their belt to be able to stop this. You could potentially stop them mid-combo and screw them over that way, but if you're going to be relying on unsearchable tech cards to do this, there are plenty of better options. If you run it, I wouldn't run any more than 1. The next card is Berserker Crush, showing what happens when something cute and fluffy finally takes enough of your shit. Remove from play one monster from your graveyard. The attack and defense of one face-up winged Kuriboh you control becomes equal to the attack and defense of that monster until the end phase of this turn. It's not going to win you any duels anytime soon, but I kinda like it due to it being the absolute last thing anyone would expect out of a winged Kuriboh. It's better than Transcendent Wings in that it can be used on your turn in order to act as a big beater during your battle phase, but without anywhere near as high of a cost as that card. Some good targets for this card to copy would include Saryuya, Envoy of the Beginning, and of course Dystopia. Ratios may vary depending on the amount of winged Kuriboh in the deck, but it should be fine at 1 or 2. The last card is Generation Next. If your life points are lower than your opponent's, choose one elemental hero, Kuriboh, or Neospatian monster whose attack is equal to or lower than the difference in life points between you and your opponent from your deck or graveyard, and add it to your hand or special summon it, but you cannot activate its effect or the effects of cards with the same name this turn. You can only activate one Generation Next per turn. Jesus Christ, I thought I was done with the random cross-archetype support cards after Ojamas, but dally-ho, here we are again. I'm going to ignore the E-Hero and Neo side, since absolutely none of it helps out Kuribohs and vice versa. But as a Kuriboh support card, this is pretty neat. Much like with Flute, this is primarily used for getting a free body on board in order to get further plays, but there are a few more uses you can get out of this one. For one thing, it prevents effect activation, but doesn't negate continuous effect, meaning that you can instantly shut out Sky Strikers by summoning Wing Kuriboh level 9 with this card. It can also search out Clear and Kuriboh in order to set up their graveyard effects after using them as material, and it can even serve the same purpose as Flute by summoning the original Kuriboh in order to use one of the support cards that interact directly with it. Make sure to run 3 copies once it comes out about a month from now. Here's a close approximation of how a Kuriboh deck would work in MR4 with Link Spam and Dystopia Beatdown elements installed. I'm running Sabatil in this, mostly so that Generation Next can be live on turn 1. If you have any better options you'd like to run, feel free to add them in. Now as for the diagnosis, there's not a whole lot to talk about here aside from the obvious. By which I mean that Kuribohs need an actual win condition for them to work toward. They're all pretty weak and are only really capable of disruption, so they need to have some power to back up their abilities. Some more cohesion in the archetype would be appreciated as well, since they were never intended to be one until much later. They need to be able to work together while also incentivizing using the older members of the archetype. Lastly, some more relevant disruption/negation would be appreciated so it can stand up in the current meta. Now for the prescription, I actually don't need to look too far for inspiration, as there was one point in the anime where the Kuribohs were actually functional as an archetype. Thus we just have to work on adapting these for the modern game and we'll have the basic core of the new support. Thus we start off with Kuriboh, Kuribeh, Kuribi, and Kuriboh. They're all Dark Fiends that are always treated as Kuriboh monsters and can't be used as link material for a non-Kuriboh monster. They also have a soft once per turn effect that can negate an effect while you control each of them and 4 other Kuriboh monsters. Ba negates monster effects, Be negates spell cards, B negates traps, and Boo negates attacks and ends the battle phase. The necessity to have a near full field of Kuribohs in order to negate pretty much everything at a soft once per turn should balance things somewhat, though there are a few support cards that you can use to help take advantage of the situation. They don't destroy anything, so you have to be careful about negating continuous cards or effects, but other than that, you should be able to get a lot of mileage with these. The restriction on link summoning is a bit annoying, but considering the power of some of this new support, I figured it was a necessary evil to prevent it breaking completely. I would try to run 2 of each of these in the main deck and then side out your ratios according to your matchup. The next monster is their first boss monster of the archetype, Kuriboh. It's a level 5 Dark Fiend fusion monster with variable attack and defense. Requires 2 or more Kuriboh monsters as material. Must first be special summoned from your extra deck by banishing the above monsters you control. You do not use polymerization. This card's attack and defense is equal to the combined attack the monsters banished for this card's summon had on the field. Quick effect, you can shuffle this card into the extra deck, special summon as many of your banished Kuriboh monsters as possible. You can only use this effect of Kuriboh once per turn. Yes, it's a contact fusion with very few beneficial effects and an attack that would only get up to 1500 attack under normal circumstances. However, there are a few things that make this card worthwhile. For one thing, it takes the combined attack the materials had on the field into its stats, meaning that even an incidental boost adds up pretty quickly. To add to this, it also has a tag-out effect reminiscent of ABC Dragon Buster that also has the ability to recycle your banished Kuriboh monsters like Clear and Kuriboh. However, it is not itself treated as a Kuriboh monster since it would otherwise be broken with certain support cards. But even without that, it's still the only source of real power in this archetype, so make sure to run 2 of these. Following this theme of big Unikuribohs, the next card in this lineup is Kuribalthazar. It's a rank 1 Dark Fiend Xyz monster with Kuriboh stats, requires 2 or more level 1 monsters as material, and has the following effect. This card gains 300 attack for each Xyz material attached to this card. Once per turn, quick effect, you can detach 1 Xyz material from this card, then activate one of the following effects. Take 1 Kuriboh monster that is either banished or in your graveyard and either add it to your hand or special summon it, or set 1 spell or trap card directly from your deck that specifically lists a Kuriboh monster in its card text. It can be activated this turn. It allows you to recycle your Kuribohs in order to both use their effects or use them as material and get them back into the graveyard. However, considering the fact that this is also not a Kuriboh monster, there will need to be some additional setup to use them as material considering some of the new support. Speaking of said support, this card also searches out those cards as long as they specifically list a Kuriboh monster by name in their card text. This includes all of the gimmicky support cards we talked about already, and the new spell and trap support we'll get into later, the only exceptions being Sabatil, Generation Next, and their new field spell, though given how said field spell has a similar search effect, that was very much by design. Make sure to run at least one of these in your extra deck. The last monster is Kuriboh. It's a massive Link 5 light fairy with a whopping 1500 attack and dark fluid arrows. Requires 5 Kuriboh monsters and material, and this card is always treated as a Kuriboh monster. It's unaffected by your opponent's card effects, and the attacks for your opponent's monsters become direct attacks. Quick effect, you can pay 300 life points, add 1 Kuriboh monster from your graveyard to your hand. You can only use this effect of Kuriboh once per turn. I know the high cost for the low attack may have been alarming at first, but all things considered, it's still very much worth it. Not only does it have full immunity to your opponent's card effects, but it also turns all their attacks into direct attacks, meaning it's effectively immune to battle destruction as well. And since your opponent is still attacking directly, a lot of your more situational Kuribohs are going to be live a lot more often, so you're going to be able to use them properly a lot easier. As if that weren't enough, this card also recycles said Kuribohs as a quick effect so that you can use them more than once. Furthermore, it can also set up a lock with another support card that we'll get into later, and since this is treated as a Kuriboh monster, it can get up to some decent attack stats, so there's some ways you can make up for the heavy cost. Run 1 or 2. Their first spell card is the long-anticipated 5-star Twilight. Tribute 1 level 5 monster, special summon 5 Kuriboh monsters with different names from your hand or deck, including 1 Kuriboh. They cannot be tributed for a tribute summon. You cannot link summon the turn you use this effect, except Kuriboh monsters. You can only activate 1 5-star Twilight per turn. I did my level best to try and future-proof this card with the link summon restriction because this effect is pretty darn busted, all things considered. Tributing a level 5 monster is barely a cost for being able to summon 5 monsters off to 1 freaking card. One of them does have to be the original Kuriboh, but other than that, you're free to load up the field with whatever you want. With this, you can basically get free access to any of the new boss monsters at their highest power with very little setup. Furthermore, it simply needs any level 5 monster as material, meaning that it makes instant fusion a staple card in the deck, as it both provides a monster to use this effect with, and even lowers your life points to be able to make Generation Next live. Some ideal instant fusion targets would of course include El Shaddai Winda, Invoked Raijin, Sea Monster Theseus, or even Ojama Knight if you want to go for the meme potential. If you plan on doing anything with this deck, you can't do with any less than 3. The next card is Rainbow Blessing. It's a quick play with this effect. If you control a Kuriboh monster, you can activate this effect. During your next battle phase, monsters you currently control can attack directly. If you control Rainbow Kuriboh, your opponent cannot activate cards or effects in response to this card's activation. Also, they cannot activate cards or effects during the battle phase this turn. Another card which went through some noticeable changes from this anime incarnation without actually changing what it's supposed to do. But in this case, however, it was adjusted in the exact opposite direction. While it may seem to be pointless for it to be a quick play, it does have some benefits to activating it on the opponent's turn. Namely the fact that it locks the opponent out of card effects on their battle phase if used with Rainbow Kuriboh, which can stop a lot of common effects such as Boral Sword, Utopia Lightning, and Evenly Matched, just to name a few. It also leaves them more susceptible to battle traps since they won't be able to negate any of them, so you can easily turn the tides against them with this card. The requirement to use specifically Rainbow Kuriboh is new to the card in case you missed it, but it also serves as a bit of balancing as it's one of the under-supported Kuribohs. Even still, you'll want to run 2 or 3 of these. Their new field spell is a brand new card called Kuriboh Village. All Kuriboh monsters you control gain attack equal to the number of Kuriboh monsters you control times 300. You can only use each of the following effects of Kuriboh Village once per turn. When this card is activated, you can add 1 spell or trap card that specifically lists a Kuriboh monster in its card text from your deck to your hand. And during either player's end phase, you can special summon Kuriboh monsters with different names from your graveyard, up to the number of Kuriboh monsters sent from your hand to the graveyard this turn. The attack boost seems inconsequential at first glance, considering that Kuriboh monsters have such low attack in the first place, however, it adds up very quickly. With a full field of Kuribos counting the extra monster zone, the boost becomes a whopping 1800 points, turning a regular Kuriboh into a normal summonable 2100 beat stick. And if you then combine them all into Kirby Babylon, it becomes a massive beast that can beat over just about any monster. And if you then add Rainbow Blessing into the mix, your opponent is about to be taking some serious damage. Do the math, I'll give you a hint.
It's over 9,000!
As if that wasn't enough, it also searches out the support cards, including Rainbow Blessing and 5-star Twilight, so you'll be able to pull it off somewhat consistently. All that being considered, the recycling effect seems inconsequential by comparison, but it also helps fill the field and get some recursion from using your Kuribos the way they're supposed to be used. All in all, it's a fantastic card, and you should never run any less than 3. The last card is the continuous trap card, the Flute of Rallying Kuriboh. While you control Kuriboh, you take no battle damage. You can only use one of the following effects of the Flute of Rallying Kuriboh per turn, and only once per turn. Add one Kuriboh monster from your deck or graveyard to your hand, or special summon one Kuriboh monster from your deck or graveyard. The battle damage prevention while you control the original Kuriboh seems a bit unnecessary, but it is a case of completely locking out the opponent while Curry Bethany is on the field, so it's not without its uses. It also lists Kuriboh by name, so it can be searched out by Village and Balthazar, so its other effect makes it very versatile as a generic reusable Flute of Summoning Kuriboh, in that it can also take from the graveyard as well as the deck. It isn't adding to the OTK potential or anything, so it's not the most relevant thing to run, especially considering it's searchable when needed, but 1 or 2 should be fine. And that should do it. I think I may have overcompensated this archetype just a bit, but they were long overdue for it, so we'll just have to see how this ends up. Honestly, I'm just surprised that a proper wave of Kuriboh support never happened, considering just how ingrained they are into the series as a whole. Considering how every main character since Yugi has used them in one form or another, the ubiquity of this archetype is just screaming for a proper deck of their own. I'm sure it'll happen eventually, especially considering this year's advent calendar seems to be pushing the archetype hard, so hopefully their time in the sun will be coming soon. Until then, they'll just have to settle for being the cute mascot for the game that holds a very special place in the hearts of many. Thank you guys so much for watching. Like I said, I'm dedicating this one to my sister Skylar as a Christmas present, so I had to work ahead of this on schedule so that it would be ready in time. Hopefully the other stuff I did for Christmas didn't suffer for this and turned out okay enough. Regardless, thank you guys for watching, happy holidays, and until next time, don't get run over, and I'll see you guys later.